when you want to understand about a new market. Don't come with your foreign perspective and expect that you can copy-paste.
Here is the suppliers choosing to whom to sell, not the buyer choosing who do I buy from. Here in Vietnam doesn't work quite like this, because as I mentioned earlier on, all the decision was from top to down. Everybody's talking about is outsourcing manufacturing, which almost every single country is looking into Vietnam to be able to do this.
Hi everyone, welcome to this new video. In today's episode, we're going to discuss about doing business in Vietnam as a foreigner, running a company here in that fast growing economy in 2026 with all the opportunities, but as well with all the trade-off, or at least what people never tell you about what's the current situation here in terms of managing and operating a company. I'm happy to have Gabi here to join me on this discussion. Gabi, welcome to this video, and can you give us a 1-minute introduction about yourself?
Thank you, Guillaume. It's been a real pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me and asking my opinion about Vietnam in 2026. I'm originally Italian citizen. I've been in Southeast Asia, mainly based in Vietnam for the last 22 years. And let's say in these 22 years, I had 3 long stints with 3 different companies and businesses based in Vietnam, but operating in all Southeast Asia region.
Maybe first question first. How do you see Vietnam right now position in terms of opportunities for either European or US companies looking into that market?
Okay. In fact, the Vietnam GDP for 2026 is forecast to be 7.2, 70.5%, while the 2025 was just over 8%. So you can see these figures are like a booming economy. Vietnam is definitely the highest fast growing country for GDP. Regarding the FDI, also Vietnam is a very interesting country for many, many foreign investment companies and multinationals. In fact, the foreign direct investment just for the first quarter of 2026 is 18.5 billion. And somebody would say, oh, it's a huge figure. Yes, especially compared to what it was last year, because this year the forecast would be an increase of 32% in the foreign direct investment. Mainly this is coming from European companies and for companies from North America.
Thanks, Gabi, for sharing about those numbers. And it's important also to emphasize that the Vietnamese government have a double-digit growth target in terms of GDP for 2026. Let's now discuss more about those vibrant sectors. You have, I think, interesting thing to share from either market entry perspective or the opposite, exporting goods from Vietnam. What would be for you the key sectors that foreign players should have a look?
Oh, Guillaume, this is a very wide question you asked me, because in Vietnam, many industries are booming at the moment. Of course, one that everybody's talking about is the outsourcing manufacturing, which almost every single country is looking into Vietnam to be able to do this. Outsourcing IT as well. In the last, I must say, 10 years, Vietnam has been one of the most favorable countries to offer this type of services. And of course, tourism in Vietnam is booming. So tourism, as everybody knows, is a massive business here in Southeast Asia. And of course, there is education in the last probably 5-7 years is becoming one of the really important areas where Vietnamese government wants to focus on to improve education. In fact, we have much more universities, a relationship with international educational systems. And of course, Vietnam has a lot of young population that likes to go and study abroad. So these are reciprocal, the agreements between different universities in not just in the region, but in North America and in Europe.
Thank you, Gabi. Maybe one more could be added, could be all the development for the infrastructure, the green tech, the clean tech, because Vietnam also want to become a more green country or clean country.
Yes, of course. This is a very, very big sector at the moment. In fact, for the solar panels, the hydroelectric plants that are at the moment, and of course the infrastructure in Vietnam now is completely different than what it was 20 or 30 years ago. Now there is all the new transport systems. We have the metros in Hanoi, in Saigon, we have the highways, we have an enormous amount of industrial parks. In fact, every other week there seems to be a new industrial park in either the north, the center, or the south.
I would like to take a moment to speak about this, about industrialization of the country and how Vietnam has become one of the most favorable China plus one destinations. So typically European, American, Australian buyers and brands or even manufacturers used to be producing goods in China. Now they are looking at moving part of their production outside. Sometimes they are looking even at shutting down their Chinese operation or their Chinese suppliers to move everything out. What are from you the trends and the dynamics into that China plus one with Vietnam as the center of this phenomenon?
Mm. Okay, Dion, can give you a very simple example. Let's think about the shoes manufacturing company. So these, I don't want to mention any names, but we know there are those 5, 6 companies at global level that control the production of shoes, especially for the sport type of shoes and garment also. Everything used to be made in China until probably 10 years ago, 15 years ago. More and more factories from these companies are relocating in other countries. Vietnam is definitely the number one country for factories relocating outside from China, outside China. In fact, in Vietnam, here we are at the moment, also Chinese companies, they are opening new companies, new factories here in Vietnam, in partnership mainly with local companies as well. So it's not just foreign companies moving out from China. I have to say there's also Chinese company moving out to China or expanding to the new market. And Vietnam is location-wise and how easy it is to do business in the country, it makes it like a very good place to be.
Okay, it's great. You make me an easy link for this ease of doing business. It's true that as a foreigner, you can set up a 100% foreign-owned companies in most of the sectors. If you are touching regulating sectors, sometimes you need to have a local partner or to do some type of joint venture. But I would say 90%, 95% of the business lines are open for foreign ownership here. So that's great. But in today's video, I would also like to emphasize and then to put more the focus on what could be from your idea and your view about the main differences between the West and here how things are done in the East.
Very good question, Guillaume. And in fact, I think this would be a very good opportunity for people thinking to relocate their businesses or open some new activities here in Southeast Asia. As you are a French citizen, I'm from Italy, so we are Europeans. Usually in Europe, it's very easy for somebody to set up a new company. Just need to have an idea, little bit of money, or sometimes you can get grants from your government or from some other associations, and then you apply to register your company. You register your company, and within a week or two, you're already starting your new business. So it seems very easy to open a company and to actually start. So usually for the first 2 or 3 years, you won't have any problem. Even the tax office will leave you alone because they understand you're a new business and they want to see how you grow. So here in Southeast Asia is different. In some more developed and with more international experience, business-wise, countries, we see an example like Singapore, is very straightforward. It's probably even easier than opening a company in Europe and then the US. In there, just formality, everything is online these days. In a week, 10 days, you have all your paperwork done and you can start working straight away. In some other countries like Vietnam, where there is still a little bit of need for navigating the red tape that there could be between different departments, because the Vietnamese government is great that in the last probably 10, 15 years, they made much easier for foreign companies to come invest or open the offices, representative offices here in Vietnam. So every year there are new regulations that the government and local authorities are implementing to streamline operations for companies that they want to start or change the business license here. Then, of course, there are differences to notice between different parts of the country. Let's say in the north, in the center of Vietnam, because although the central government always makes the main recommendation, also you need to liaise with the local authorities. So it depends on which type of activity you're planning to do. There will be some perhaps differences between different parts of the country. Some of them perhaps at the specific industrial parks, so they incentivize companies to come to produce electronics, while some other ones perhaps they have more interest or having factories that produce furniture, an example. So they will make it much easier for these type of companies to be able to set up operations in there.
Thank you, Gabi. I think it's interesting to have your view on that, and I share similar perspective. I think in Vietnam, just because there is multiple stakeholders in different sectors, it can look or it can actually be sometimes more fragmented in terms of the people you need to speak to, the department you need to speak to, etc. I would always recommend to either do a preliminary study to map those partners who you should be speaking with, as well as when you are really doing something on the ground, hire the right specialists. For example, lawyer, accountants, industrial experts. Do you share the same view on that, or do you have another experience to share.
Absolutely, absolutely. You cannot do it by yourself. Basically, you cannot just, let's say, if you are the CEO of a company in London and you send two or three of your team to set up a company here. If they don't have the local support, it's not going to happen. They're going to come back headquarters in London and say, sorry, we just couldn't do it. So of course, you definitely need the support of a lawyer, would be for sure, and then you need also to contact an accountant. They will be able to support you while you're doing this process. For all the licenses, language problems could be also an issue. You go to some local offices to get a particular document, and you might not find somebody that speaks your own language.
Roughly, the timeline from my own experience is around 30 to 40 working days to set up 100% foreign-owned entity here with the basic license to operate. It can be a consulting agency, it can be a wholesale type of business, trading company. But as soon as you will need to deal with manufacturing purpose, then also you need to get all the permit from the different developers or local stakeholders. So it's a journey that needs to be planned ahead and can take a couple of months. Vietnam is also moving quite fast. They have been merging the provinces a couple of months ago. So also expect, as someone who is new to Vietnam, who will start, to get also the latest updated information. Something that you can read online from 2 or 3 years ago may be already outdated. Things may have changed. So get yourself also updated about that and try to contact different people to cross-check the information that you find on the ground to make sure that, okay, I'm going through the right path and I'm taking the right decisions. Now, Gabi, coming back to a bit the differences that from a foreign perspective we could have in terms of the cultural gap or the way of doing business, is there some of the things that should be highlighted for newcomers, for people who are totally new to Vietnam and who will be coming here to do business for the first time?
Yes, somebody has never been here to Vietnam and is thinking about setting up business. My advice would be first you come and you need to learn about the country, the history, and the culture, especially the working culture, because it's very particular. You might have some experience in already some Southeast Asian country, could be Malaysia, could be Thailand, Singapore, and you think, okay, I've done this, we can replicate this, and it will work also in Vietnam. No, it will not work because Vietnam is kind of a unique culture, especially in the company and working relationship environment. Because in Vietnam, everything is based on relationships. So you could be the most important person in your company. You come here to Vietnam to talk to manager of a factory that you're planning to work with, and you used to, like in Western countries, to this is what we would like. I see that you can offer this to us. Let's sign a contract, and then everybody's happy. On paper, yes. In reality, no. Before you actually sign the contract and you decide to go into business with somebody in Vietnam, you need first to build a relationship with them. If you don't have a relationship, there will be no business. And this goes overall also the financial aspect. If people are not happy to work with you, it won't work. They might say yes to you in your face, but actually it won't happen. Because another little difference, very important, and in Vietnam, many situations, it's not culturally accepted to say no. So they might say yes in your face, yes, but this is mainly done in order not to lose face, not to be rude towards you because you came from a different country, you try to do business here. But even if they are not interested, sometimes they still say, yes, let's keep the conversation. With reality is actually, they are not planning to do with you because they haven't had enough time to develop a relationship with you.
So you have pointed interesting things. When you want to understand about a new market, don't come with your foreign perspective and expect that you can copy paste.
Correct.
When you want to engage even sometimes with a supplier, the supplier is assessing you, is making sure that you are a serious buyer. So don't expect that because you're going to buy from a factory, then they're going to open you the doors and bringing you around and giving you a lot of their time. No, because they're also very busy people.
Correct. Here is the suppliers choosing to who we sell, not the buyer choosing who do I buy from. This is a very, very different from Western mentality. So I'm the buyer, so I decide where to buy and how to buy. No, here is the seller and decide to who to sell when. So
that's great, Gabi. And then last thing, what about the hierarchy that we have here?
Vietnam specifically, the hierarchy is very top down. I saw I saw many companies coming into Vietnam the last 22 years. In fact, for the first 6, 7 years of my working experience here in Southeast Asia, I was helping companies to do the supply chain and also relocate their staff from different countries to Vietnam or coming from Vietnam to go back to Europe or to the US. I had the opportunity to talk quite extensively with these CEO, directors, CFOs. They were coming into the country for 1, 2, 3 years and then having to go back to their own country or perhaps move to different countries, even still here in the region. And what pretty much all of them shared with me that they survived the Vietnamese working environment. The ones that they, as a first approach, because it's what they knew in their own countries, having a linear way for the company to run, expecting that everybody to take their own responsibilities to make the right decision at the right time. Here in Vietnam, it doesn't work quite like this because, as I mentioned earlier on, all the decision was from top to down. So it's not unusual to have like a multi-million dollar companies run by Mr. X, and Mr. X will decide what color the toilet paper will be or what kind of lunch the staff will eat on Monday. This doesn't happen in the West because we have, HR or other departments will look into this. Here, actually, most of the decision, even sometimes small ones, they taken from the top. So the mid-management is not used to take their own decision, not to stick their head out of the water, let's say. It works, it has advantages in many ways, of course. When you are in Vietnam, this is the way to work, but has some disadvantages for foreign companies when they have to adapt their working rhythm, their working pattern when they are dealing with all the Vietnamese staff.
So it also means that for decision-making purpose, looking at C-levels, looking at managers are important in terms of who should I engage with. If you want to do business with any Vietnamese conglomerate or even Vietnamese owned company, that's your point.
Yes, of course, for sure. And my advice is to all the people that I meet, usually say, Gabriel, you need to talk with this guy in this company, can you introduce me to him? I said, yeah, sure. Let's organize a dinner together, or perhaps a lunch one of these days. You come along and you just come as somebody sharing a meal with everybody. And it's the best way usually to start a relationship with somebody that you're planning to make some business with.
Thanks, Gabi, and it's great. I can relate a lot with what you share. If you want to get in touch with someone, it's very often outside of the office environment.
Correct.
It's very often doing sport with the person, sharing a meal, sharing a coffee, and that's how you get introduced to a new group of peers. Networking is also very important here. So if you are a newcomer flying here to Vietnam for the first time, try to join some networking activities. You will usually gather with people from your same industry, same group, and it's also easier like that to break the ice, to get into a new group of people, to share about who you are, your journey, your plan, and directly engage with the key people you would like to do business with. Gabi, something we have not touched until now, and it's actually very important if you speak to any Vietnamese people, is the differences between the North and the South. Personally, when I send some of my team to the northern part of Vietnam, sometimes I feel like they can be a bit more reluctant to go compared to going in the southern part. I mean, at least most of them are from the southern part of Vietnam. How is it from a foreign perspective doing business with the northern community or versus the south?
I was based in Hanoi, so I straight into the deep end, straight into the challenges of Vietnam, and of course. Now it's a little bit different, talking about quite a few years ago. So the North Vietnam or the center or the South, still the same country, still the same culture, but with some strong differences. North Vietnam has been is much more conservative society. The weather, the effects, how business is done, because they have 4 seasons. They have winter, they have the spring, they have the summer, the autumn. Here in the South, and to a certain extent, Central Vietnam also, is only 2 seasons. Also, the government, it sits in Hanoi. So if you need to meet certain type of people, you will need to be based in Hanoi because some decisions are made in there. So if you have an office here in Ho Chi Minh City, you would definitely have always an office also in Hanoi to be able to liaise with this type of engagement that you need to do. This especially for I'm talking about like big multinational companies that come to set up business in Vietnam. If you're a very small entity, of course, you don't need perhaps to have like the main office based in Hanoi, because you need to be there to be able to liaise with the right authorities to be able to implement your plans. Also, all the embassies are based in Hanoi. So if you need support from the embassy, and sometimes it can be in Vietnam a very small circle, these diplomatic circles, which they are also always associated with the business side. Help, again, in Hanoi, they are there, they're on the ground, they will be able to help you or to advocate your cause with the local representatives. Instead, here in the South, everything seems a little bit more, let's say, relaxed. There is no winter, so no need to wear a big jacket. This is the way I see it. You can go out to like with pair of shorts and a t-shirt, and everything will be okay. The local administrations also, they're quite different the way they operate, because some regulations that they are strictly looked after in the north, perhaps in the south the regulation applies in a different way, because the local government also, they are able to change some regulation for, especially for companies that they need to set up new headquarters, they need to set up a new factory and so on. And I would say there is also another, Vietnam is divided in mainly two regions, the Hanoi Haiphong area, which they have like lots of industrial areas, industrial parks, they are mining and deep sea ports, which are you need for the import and export of the goods. And in the south, which is Ho Chi Minh City, Dinh Nguyen, and all the area. Now we're gonna have the new international airport opening in Long An soon, so that's also would be an extra help for all the infrastructure for the supply chain. But we also have a new area in Da Nang, which in the last perhaps 10 years is been popping up. They have some deep sea ports now, they're operating really well. Factories relocating the brand new industrial parks, and they are perfect for anybody that wants to set up some type of activity. Central Vietnam probably at the moment is the best area, because the local government, it really incentivizes you to move there, and they cut down on almost all the red tape.
Okay, it's great, Gabi, that you could share also about Da Nang, Quang Nam, and the central part of Vietnam, because it's true, it's raising an area with a lot of investment from local authorities. But just to wrap up your ideas, in the north, it's going to be more linked to the government, more traditional, while in the south, it's going to be more the entrepreneurship spirit. People tend to be more open, share more ideas. Companies are very often more mixed between foreigners and Vietnamese. So these are actually two clusters that anyone should consider when moving here. Which one makes a lot of sense? And if you are actually importing products, want to import machinery, want to import any type of goods, you may sometimes actually need to set up two representative office, or at least two distribution channels in both of those regions, because if you have only one distributor in the southern part of Vietnam, they may not necessarily want to deal with the northern industrial clusters and the industrial stakeholder located in the northern part, and vice versa. Correct. So from a market entry perspective, keep that in mind. And actually, I will leave below in the description more details about our services. And feel free to talk to us, because Gabi and I are very open to share ideas about what's the current landscape, share tips, and then also give you some ideas on how you can approach the Vietnamese market from either a market entry perspective, so distributing goods here, or the way around, so manufacturing in Vietnam to export worldwide. Gabi, do you have a final word for our audience?
Thank you, Guillaume. It's been a pleasure to have this discussion with you, a very open discussion, and it brings back quite a few memories of my early days in Vietnam and all the challenges that I had to overcome, let's say. And for you that will be listening to this video, thank you very much for listening. And if you do consider Vietnam as a plan for your company expansion and market entry, do let us know, because at every source we are here to make sure that throughout our experience, we make your life much easier to accomplish your business ideas here in Vietnam.
Thank you, Gabi. I see you in the next video. Bye-bye.